The last broadcast. The storm raged outside, rattling the windows of the tiny radio station where Daniel sat, his fingers hovering over the console. It was his final shift at WXRK, a forgotten late-night station that barely had any listeners. A fitting farewell for a job he had grown to resent. The building was old, the equipment outdated, and the eerie silence between songs made the place feel more like a tomb than a workplace. He sighed, flicking the mic on. Good evening, night owls. This is Daniel Carter, coming to you live for one last time. Hope someone out there is listening. A crackle of static filled his headphones. Then a voice. Daniel. He froze. The lines were dead. No one was supposed to be calling in. His eyes darted to the switchboard. Every indicator was off. The voice had come from nowhere. Then it spoke again. Don't go. Daniel's pulse thundered in his ears. Who is this? Silence. He pulled off his headphones, heart pounding. The station was empty, just him and the faint hum of old equipment. The storm outside roared louder, and the fluorescent lights above flickered. Then the static returned. He turned back to the console, eyes widening in horror. The sound wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. It was coming from behind him. Slowly, he turned, breath hitching in his throat. The room was still empty, at least it looked that way, but something was off. The air had changed. It was heavier now, pressing against his skin like unseen hands. A chill slithered down his spine as the static deepened, shifting into something else. A whisper, a deep, guttural sound that made his stomach churn. He reached for his phone, his fingers fumbling over the screen, but the screen remained black, dead. The power surged again, the overhead lights blinking erratically. His reflection in the station's glass window distorted, warping into something unrecognizable. A twisted, grinning version of himself staring back. Then the voice returned. Louder. Stay. The door to the booth slammed shut. The locks clicked. The mic, still live, picked up the rapid thudding of his heartbeat. He pounded on the door, but it refused to budge. The radio feed crackled with static again, but this time there was something underneath it, a faint, distorted recording of his own voice. It was his show from earlier that night, looping back at him. Only now, there was something else layered beneath his words. Breathing, labored, heavy breathing that wasn't his own. Daniel turned to the console, his hands shaking as he tried to shut down the transmission. The buttons wouldn't respond. The volume dial turned by itself, the whispering voice growing louder, consuming the station, the storm outside, his own desperate thoughts. Then something shifted in the air. A presence, a cold, crawling sensation spread across his skin, like unseen fingers brushing against his neck. He whipped around, but there was still nothing, just the dim glow of the equipment and the flickering emergency light above the door. And then, footsteps. Soft at first, barely audible beneath the storm outside, but growing louder, closer, echoing against the walls of the small station, as if something was pacing just beyond the booth's glass door. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to wake up from whatever nightmare he had fallen into. A whisper, inches from his ear, "You can't leave." His eyes snapped open. The glass door separating the recording booth from the hallway was now fogged over, as if something had exhaled against it from the other side. Slowly, a handprint began to form in the condensation. Not his own, larger. Fingers stretched too long, too thin. Then, the door creaked open. The station's emergency lights flickered wildly as Daniel backed away, pressing himself against the console. He could hear it now, low, ragged breathing, coming from just inside the doorway. The shadow in the fog glass took shape, shifting, stretching. Something impossibly tall stepping into the booth with him. The radio equipment crackled again. The microphone, still live, picked up something, a distorted voice garbled like a corrupted recording. "Now you're one of us." The lights surged one last time, blinding white, before the entire station was plunged into darkness. The next morning, WXRK was silent. No final broadcast. No Daniel Carter. Just the sound of dead air and If one listened closely enough, a faint whisper beneath the static